What are you afraid of? Is anything causing you fear? It can be hard to admit that. But today I was listening to a podcast about cryptocurrency and how cryptocurrency has turned out to be a massively speculative and even fraudulent enterprise. A couple years ago, investing in crypto was all the rage. There were commercials at the Super Bowl and people were talking about how it's skyrocketing, but now it fell apart. But I want to ask, why was crypto all the rage? I think it had something to do with fear. Any scheme that promises to be a get-rich-quick kind of a scheme that promises financial security so that we don't have to be afraid about providing for ourselves and our families is always going to be a very powerfully motivating force. And that's what we want to talk about this week. We're continuing to study some stories at the end of the book of Jeremiah. This week, looking at chapters 42 and 43. They continue the story of the remnant of Jews who are living in the land of Judah after the aftermath of the Babylonian invasion. You might remember from last week that Gedaliah, the governor of the remnant, was assassinated, and an army officer named Johanan had rounded up the people and was now taking them on a journey to the land of Egypt where they believed they would be safe. Well, at the end of chapter 41, Johanan and the people make a stop in the town of Bethlehem. And that's where the story picks up in Jeremiah chapter 42. So we read that they decide to go to the prophet Jeremiah, who has been traveling with them. They want to ask him to pray to God on their behalf so that God will guide them. But I wonder, are they being genuine? Do they really want God to guide them? They kind of make it sound like they are ready and willing to hear from God, and at the same time, we already learned that they're heading towards Egypt. So what if God says, don't go to Egypt, but stay in Judah, like he had previously said? It's a scenario that I think probably sounds familiar to many of us. We act first, and then we go and ask God to bless what we did. We formulate a plan, and then we go to him saying, God, I want you to support my plan. We invite God into a situation that's already a done deal. And if we would really deeply examine our intentions, we're really not all that interested in what God might have to say to us. Well, as Jeremiah hears the people's request, he says, okay, I'll do it. I'll pray to God and I will tell you everything he says. Well, he does so, and 10 days later, God responds. The people are excited. If we look at verses 5 and 6, they are so committed. They say that no matter what God says to them, whether it is favorable or unfavorable, they are going to do whatever God says. If God says go to Egypt or stay right here in Judah, they are all in. Well, what happens when we don't like what God is saying to us? We might believe we're all in, but what will happen to the people when God says, no, I don't like your plan. I want you to follow a different plan, my plan. And I want you to trust in me that my plan is actually better. What if the people don't like that? Will they remain all in and committed? Well, in verses 9 through 18, here is the message from the Lord. The Lord wants you to stay in Judah, people. And Jeremiah says, there in Judah, he will build you up, he will protect you, and he will restore the land. So do not go to Egypt or you will surely die. Jeremiah concludes then, giving some commentary on his own, telling the people that their bold commitment to God might have actually been a sham, and that they were never truly interested in being guided by God in the first place. So what's going to happen? How will the people respond? Jeremiah has dealt with this situation so many times in his life. He has been given words from God to the people that the people don't want to hear, whether it was the kings or the priests or leaders of Judah, and it just didn't go well. People don't want God to guide them through the midst of the difficulty and the valley of the shadow of death. People want God to take it all away and make life easy and comfortable and safe. People say they want God to lead them, but what they actually want is God to bless them. And what's going on? Behind it all is their fear. God doesn't always answer our prayers by saying that He is going to take away everything that makes us afraid. Sometimes He says, oftentimes He says, trust in me in the midst of your fear and I will carry you through. If we look closely at verses 10 through 12, God is saying to the people, my people, I'm grieved over all the pain that you've endured. But if you trust in me, I will protect you. I'll help you thrive in the middle of this devastation that causes you fear. So don't be afraid of Babylon because I am with you. I am for you. I will save you. This causes us to remember that God is good. God is loving. But neither His goodness nor His love means that He promises to take away all the hardships that we face in life. Instead, He gives us His goodness and His love in the middle of our fear. So how will the Judeans respond? Remember back in verse 6 when they said that they were going to be committed to God no matter what, whether it was favorable or unfavorable? Well, in chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, Johanan and the other leaders give in to their fear. They accuse Jeremiah of lying, classic move whenever you don't hear what you like. Then they blame Jeremiah of being influenced by his secretary, Baruch, another classic move. And then finally, they describe this nightmare scenario where the Babylonians come in and kill them all. All we hear from Johanan and the people is fear, fear, and more fear. The fear is so thick in their hearts and minds, they can't see anything else. This is so strange because if you remember from last week, think about how Johanan acted in self-sacrificial honor. He tried to warn Gedaliah about the assassination plot. He volunteered to intervene and stop the assassination plot. And then after the assassination, Johanan was the guy who led the way to stop the assassins and rescue the people that he had captured. He really seemed like he was a faithful guy. Now he's anti-Jeremiah and anti-God. I wonder what changed. It seems like what changed is the assassination of Gedaliah, which, as you might remember, included also the killing of numerous Babylonian soldiers. Those two acts of crime would have been exceedingly serious offenses in the eyes of the powerful Babylonians. So I suspect that Johanan, though he originally courageously intervened and rescued his people, is now very scared. He appears convinced that the Babylonians will respond with severe punishment. And so he concludes that Jeremiah's view is wrong. There's no way in Johanan's mind that they should be staying in Judah. Fear is ruling his every thought, word and deed, and God is the farthest thing from Johanan's reality anymore. Fear does that. It captures our imaginations so that we can only think of bad news, bad outcomes, failure, pain. And the sneaky thing about fear is that we allow it access to the center of our being, but we do so thinking that we are right to be fearful. We're evaluating our situation and we believe it is truly awful and the fear that we're experiencing is warranted. We don't believe that our ability to evaluate the situation has become polluted by our fear. Instead, we think we're doing what is best for ourselves and our loved ones. As a result, sneaky thing is that fear has clouded our judgment and it often pushes us in a direction away from God. So in verses 4 through 7, the story concludes with Johanan going straight away from God, headed towards Egypt. Now, it seems like Jeremiah was just a part of their group, and so he was carried along with all of them. In verses 8 through 13, the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah again, this time when they're in Egypt. God asked Jeremiah to perform a prophetic skit where he is to take stones and bury them at the steps of the palace to the Egyptian leader Pharaoh. And then God tells Jeremiah to prophesy, saying that this location is where the king of Babylon is going to come and invade, and he is going to destroy the palace and the temples of Egypt. In other words, he's saying, Johanan, people of Judah, you are not safe here. So the people believe that they have fled to safety in Egypt. But God says, Egypt can't protect you. Just you wait. Babylon is coming here too. The symbolism here is so rich because years, centuries before, God had rescued the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt, and they had given their fear over to trust in Him, and He saved them. But now, as they are rebelling against God, they believe they are pursuing safety by returning to Egypt. It seems that the Jews no longer believe God is trustworthy. It seems they don't believe God can protect them. Made me wonder then, if this was already in their hearts and minds, why did they even go to Jeremiah in the first place and ask him to inquire of God? Their minds were already made up. They gave in to their fear, and they were headed to Egypt. So I think what we see is the complexity of fear and faith. It's so messy. When we're battling fear, we can have a difficult time placing our faith in God. And so I want to ask today, how about you? What fears are you struggling with? I write this on the day of the Pennsylvania state primary election, this annual day where members of political parties go to the polls to vote on which candidates will represent their party at the general election in the fall. In our era, politicians have harnessed the power of fear, trying to convince us that our nation or our community is falling apart, and they alone have the ideas that can save us. It's a message of vote for me or die. It's all based in fear. There are so many fears in our world. Fear of financial ruin, fear of failing health, fear that our children are going to go astray. And in the midst of those fears, I want to draw our attention back to Jeremiah 42, verses 10 through 12, where we read that God is for us, God is with us, God is mighty to save. Give your fear to Him. He is the one who can truly protect us. Thank you.